thing here. This is a truss bar that had a shotgun blast directed at it. And you can see where the shotgun blast went through. That's where the fireproofing came off, okay? That makes sense. It does work. Again, no evidence that a Boeing 767 would transform into what would ultimately have to be close to 100,000 shotgun blasts for the area we're talking about. The shotgun test actually proved the fireproofing could not have been widely dislodged, and we'll get to that in the next slide, because the energy was simply not available. There was no energy left to dislodge the fireproofing because previous calculations by engineers at MIT had showed that all of the kinetic energy from the impact of the aircraft had been consumed in breaking the columns and the floors and crushing the aircraft. These engineers were trying to support the theory at the time. They had no idea that the theory was going to change. Okay? But we'll take their word for it, and that all the energy was consumed in doing the damage. The shotgun tests, you can read the report 16A Appendix C, shows that 1 megajoule per square meter was needed to dislodge the fireproofing. For all the intact floors and the columns, in the zones they're talking about that were sagging floors and softening columns, have greater than 6,000 square meters of surface area. That's then 6,000 megajoules needed, or the equivalent of several more aircraft being impacted into the airplane in order to provide the energy. Okay, so there's no energy for this. That's my point. How hot could the steel have become? That's important to their story, that the columns were softened, the floors were softened. NIST actually says a number of things. FEMA said there was 4,000 gallons of jet fuel available. FEMA says there was half of what was impacted the plane, impacted the buildings. We'll call it 4,500 gallons. This would have provided a certain amount of energy. They didn't do this calculation, by the way. The office furnishings were known. The fire load was known. Would have provided a certain amount of energy. And using the masses and specific heats for the materials heated at maximum temperature, the temperature of the steel and the concrete, could have been calculated, and the result is less than 600 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's making a lot of assumptions that favor the official story. And I'm sorry this is very technical and tedious, but this is actually assuming a lot of things, and so we'll have to kind of do another assumption and say that this is probably the maximum temperature that the steel saw, and this does match up well with the paint test. So let's take a look at the steel temperatures we've discussed so far. On the far left is the 480 degree value that the paint test showed, that less than 2% of the steel samples saw this temperature. That's very informative. The calculation is a bit above that, and that matches well. Steel at half strength is quite a bit higher than that. In the second test NIST did, we know none of the steel samples reached that temperature. The point at which steel is forged or softened in order for forming into other shapes is quite a bit higher than that. And the ASTM E119 test is done at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and so on. So the point here is that the temperatures that we have knowledge about are way too low to have softened or melted any kind of steel, even unfireproof steel. Just can't happen. Let's review their story and the problems with it. They have column breakage, which weakened the building. Then external columns saw up to 25% increases in the total load. The problems are that they can lose an additional 30 or more columns before challenging the design claims. The external columns were designed to withstand a 2,000% increase in live load. So column breakage and redistribution of loads are not a problem. Fireproofing being widely dislodged, there's no evidence that a Boeing 767 would transform into thousands of shotgun blasts. So we have no evidence that the forces were available. And the energy, we have evidence that the energy was not available. They need high steel temperatures for a long time. And as we just saw, the tests and calculations show that the steel temperatures were way too low. They go on then, unfortunately we must go on to every detail here, every falsehood. Some floors began to sag. There were only very slight sagging visible in the NIST photos from UL tests. After 2 hours in a high-temperature furnace, the metal deck of the 35-foot floor model sagged only a few inches in the middle, and the major joist parts did not sag at all. So I need picture 3. This is a picture of the model after it had been in the furnace for 2 hours. First thing I want to point out to you is that the fires in World Trade Center 2 obviously were less than 56 minutes because the building collapsed in 56 minutes. In World Trade Center 1, the fires in the south face were about 40 to 45 minutes because the NIST report says it took an hour for the fires to migrate around from the north face to the south face. There's only about 40 to 45 minutes left then. Even though that was true, we tested the floor models for 2 hours. And this is what we came up with. And they did sag in the decks. You can see the decks between the joists sagging. Okay? Can I have 4 now, please? So this is a graph of the vertical displacement in the test as a function of time. This is in minutes. So the fires lasted in the 2 buildings, 45 to 56 minutes. If you follow any of their curves, restrained, unrestrained, anything, the sagging, the vertical displacement is only a few inches, right? It's 2, 3, 4 inches. Okay? That's what they're telling us. Can I have 5 now? What did they do in their computer? They took the 4 inches, 3 inches of sagging after 2 hours. They turned it into 42 inches of sagging. So NIST's computer turned this into a dramatic 42-inch sagging with joist bending downward severely. That's deceptive. Okay? How did the sagging floors pull these exterior columns inward, causing them to buckle? We know that over 30 columns would have had to have been pulled in all at the same time. So what new force did a few inches of deck sagging apply to these 30 columns? There's a lot of numbers in here that, as far as I know, are not reconciled. They're not adequately explained. How this 14 kips per truss seat totally overwhelmed this building. Okay, so, but they did some tests, or hopefully they did some tests to prove that there was inward buckling. No, they actually didn't. They put it in the computer, and they came up with what I call a triple-double bare steel computer result. They took an exterior wall section in a computer, it's an imaginary section, 9 columns wide, 9 floors high, and they were able to, in 1 out of 9 cases, show some inward bowing. The same report says that the sagging area is only 5 floors high, so that's one of the doubles, right? NIST had to exaggerate temperatures, apply these temperatures for 90 minutes. And that's another double, right? Twice as long as the fires lasted. And then, of course, double the height of the inward pull zone to produce a hint of inward buckling or bowing. But demo would say there are other ways to produce bowing and buckling, especially right before collapse. Their last step says instability spread around the entire building. These buildings fell at nearly free fall speed, so we didn't have hardly any time for instability to spread, right? If their buildings are going to come down right together uniformly. Actually, the instability spread would have had to move at twice the speed of sound, nearly, right? And I just like this quote because it's from a book that was produced before anybody knew there were reasons not to produce these straightforward statements. A steel structure, generally speaking, does not collapse suddenly when attacked by fire. There are unmistakable warning signs, namely large deformations. So what would objective scientists have found? And this is what I believe objective scientists would have found. That relatively few columns were lost on impact. The remaining columns had considerable extra capacity. The fireproofing could not have been widely dislodged. Steel could not have softened at the temperatures found. Even at higher temperatures and longer periods, the test showed minimal sagging on the floors. The forces were not produced to pull inward the columns, and instability spread would have taken much more time and would not result in uniform free fall. So NIST's computer story is Bush science.